All right, good morning.
Good morning.
Are we okay on sound back there? Excellent. All right. Good, well, welcome back. Is it warm enough out there for you? You feeling like you're on top of this? You know, I love this weather. I'm one of those very strange, I love this weather. You know, it wakes me up, which isn't such a bad thing sometimes. Since I don't drink coffee, I got to rely on something. So, and I always figure you can dress for cold weather. There's only a certain amount you can take off when it's hot, right? Which you also get during the summer. So, well, good. Welcome back. As I think you saw, this is a continuation. This is part 3, 22nd September, 17th of November, and now here we are in January. What happened to Christmas? It seems like a long time ago now, doesn't it? Just after I left you, I flew home, had a day to pack, and jumped on the plane and was down in the West Indies. And it was a great trip. It was just absolutely the opposite of this, right? I mean, it was palm trees, and I was concerned about getting too warm. But wherever I travel, people, maybe systems, maybe governments don't, but I think people understand the value and importance of education. And everywhere I know, people are struggling with some of the behaviors that they're experiencing, the way kids come to school at risk. As I talked with them, they struggle with very, very severe behavior. They have had murders in their schools, and they say, well, it's not really about the schools. We have murders on the street outside the school and down the road. And as I think about this, I think about the things that we all do day to day, and the work that you do in particular, working every day with students. And I just want to say again, thank you for the work you do with some of our most vulnerable students, our most at-risk students. And so I just want to acknowledge that I understand that what you do is very challenging, and I'm glad you're back, and I'm glad you're continuing to move forward with your professional development, ongoing learning and growing your skills. So I'm glad you're back. Expectations, as Sherry said, today 9:30 to 2:30 we'll have you out. As always, participation is valued. Don't be afraid to stop and ask questions, raise your hand and just say, well, what about this, what about that? This is where I make sure my phone is on manners mode. I would encourage you to check your phone. Now's a great time to hear the dee-lee-lee-lee-lee sound as your phone goes on silent. So we'll take care of that, please. If you do need to take a call, all I would ask is that you step outside to do that, or if you're going to have conversation, step outside to do that so that it's not disruptive or disrespectful of the learning of others. Why do I mention all that? Because some people don't, yeah. Because one of the things that is clear to me, whether we're talking learners who are children or learners who are adults, is it is always easier to pre-correct than to correct behavior that is in progress or has already happened. And I would encourage you to think about that in regard to an ABC analysis. If I do it after the behavior and I say, oh, that phone call, would you just step outside? Is it the A, the B, or the C when I respond to it? It's a C, it's a consequence, right? And is it a reinforcer or punisher? Now remember the technical definition. We don't know because we haven't seen whether the behavior increases, decreases, or stays the same. So if I do it before behavior occurs, A, B, or C? It's an antecedent, right? It's occurring before the behavior and may eliminate the need for behavior to occur. I don't know why I threw that in there, just thought I'd apply a little bit of our ABC analysis to our day. Self-care, misery is optional. The restrooms are down the hall here. There's goodies in the back. So don't hesitate. I am not bothered at all by if you need to get up and stand, lay down, sit down, grab goodies in the back, whatever you need to do. I want you to take care of your creature comforts. I will go back to saying, and I want to remind us at multiple points along here, education is a small community. Though you have a geographically fairly large state, it's a small community, and I want us to be very cautious about using names. And I would include in that names of adults as well as names of kids, because there are teachers that are sensitive to the idea that if they can't make things happen for the students the way they'd like, that means they're a bad teacher. So let's make sure that we're anonymous or confidential with regard to students and staff as we go through these cases. Have fun, create a safe, respectful environment. Anything else we need to add to that? Okay. All right. Whoops. Talk to me about what's happened since last time. Your assignment when you left was to complete the facts A and B on at least one case. Was it two? One or two, at least one. Okay. And to create out of that, out of the information you collected, to develop a summary statement. Talk to me about how that went. I can be very patient. Yes?
We did it. I did it on one student at the high school and one student at our junior high. And we knew the answer before we did it. And so we were actually like feeling like it was, come on, because we kind of already knew. But it definitely was still then hard to make the statement. But we knew what the purpose was before we started the facts for.
So you guys knew what you believed it to be, but you went ahead and did the facts with the teacher.
Right.
Why would you do that other than an assignment? It's a good thing to do, but why? What's that?
To make sure that our hypothesis is right, or to go through the whole procedure to figure out if there was another cause, or...
Excellent. So it confirms or supports your hypothesis, okay? It also could be that somebody else has a different perspective, and if you start your plan with somebody else disagreeing with your hypothesis, you're talking about the person who has to implement your plan. So that would be a problem. There are a couple of other reasons I would do this. One is, remember, while you're sitting here having this discussion, and this is day 3 for you, that teacher is sitting back in his or her classroom, has never had this discussion. You're doing a couple of extra things. You're walking them through the process so that they better understand the ABC analysis, the function of behavior. This is about improving their skills as well and bringing them along in the process. So I'm going to keep stressing, and I'm glad that it confirmed or supported your hypothesis, but I'm also going to keep stressing, particularly as we talk today about infrastructure, very, very briefly, I understand that you are not part, in most cases, of the district in a way, or the buildings in a way, that you have control over the building systems. And I understand that, which makes it all the more critical that you coach the staff around you to better understand this process. So your role as a coach is going to be very, very important. Sherry?
Also, it gives you data to support whatever it is you're punching.
Yes. Yeah, I think that piece is really important. It's nice. I mean, this is historically one of the things that school psychs used to do, right? We would go in, we would develop plans, and then we would sort of deliver them to people because we were the experts. And what we know now is that we have to sort of bring a lot more people into the process, well, not a lot, but we have to bring more people into the process to ensure partly the process, the information, a number of pieces there. And we'll talk about, again, briefly about the importance of having a team do this rather than an individual. What other things did you experience? Yes?
We used a student that we were in the process of working on anyway, and what was interesting is there were 3 of us that had contact with him, but we all had a different idea of what his function was. So Raven suggested we go back and we did the survey to kind of figure it out, and we kind of got our answer, and we were all right.
Okay. Yeah. So you had different behaviors serving different functions? That's an important one. You can have multiple behaviors serving the same function, or same behavior, multiple behaviors, either one serving different functions. I think that's important. That's a great reason to do the facts, is to sort of start separating it out. Are there different classes of behaviors? Okay. And I love the fact you did it on something you're already working on, because I think we have to be efficient, right? Life is too busy, particularly in schools, so being efficient is one of the core concepts here.
But once we had that piece, it was easier to go and do our hypothesis statements. We had the answers.
Excellent, good. What else? Did anybody find it hard to collect the data, hard to find the data, hard to have people cooperate with the process?
Yes. Yes. We had just a brand new case, although I had information from another student and data. There wasn't much going on, and it was decreasing for some reason. So in the meantime, after November, when a student changed classrooms, there started to be things that were happening. So we started to look towards this girl and tried to collect data. And I interviewed 3 people that were involved: the classroom teacher, and the gym teacher, and the person who does the recess duty. And so these are the things that were happening. But collecting data in the classroom, the teacher was very resistant to having somebody come in and saying, I don't have time for this. And I'd say, well, then I could come in. And it was hit and miss. When I would be there, nothing would happen. And then we asked her to post up her choice of whatever checklist she could use, and she took her time doing that. She took a long time. She was resistant to that, resistant to any kind of suggestions that we had about what she could do to make the real positive and make kind of rewards to the class. So it was, yeah, I mean, so we're still in that process now of trying to collect data.
Right.
But we kind of know, we're looking at the 3 interviews with the facts and see if we can come up with a hypothesis. But
Okay.
I don't know if we're quite ready to do that because
Okay.
we want to look at the data more.
Okay. How many of you have experienced reluctance on the part of teachers to be a part of data collection on their students? Yep. How many of you have found reluctance on the part of teachers in the classroom to change their practices to accommodate your students? Yeah. I will go back once more to saying we have a system set up, education, a system set up that really doesn't work well for a coaching or collaborative model. Because what we've done is we've had teachers so long in their rooms where they have not been allowed time or the opportunity to collaborate, to be coached, to experience a coaching sort of approach, that now when we come in and say, we'd like to coach you, there is a question on their part oftentimes about, is that fair? Should I have to allow you into my classroom? And that does make it hard for our students. So part of this is coaching takes a lot of work, and it does pay off, although it is a struggle. There's actually the folks up at Kansas really do a lot in the issue of coaching around academics and behavior, and it might be something you want to look into if you want to go even into greater detail about issues of coaching for either academic or behavioral processes. Yes?
I'm working with a team and they're really happy to have me there, which is nice.
Nice.
First. But the problem is that emotions are so high that every time you ask a question, they assume you're questioning what they do. So next thing you know, you hear through the grapevine that emotions are even higher now because now somebody is questioning. So I'm trying to figure out how to pose those questions, asking them why they do certain things that they do without actually feeling like I'm
Right.
actually questioning that they're doing it wrong.
Right. It's interesting, and I will tell you this isn't easy. I know this isn't easy. A couple of things that I try. One is if they get facile, they get skilled at working through the ABC process, sometimes you can actually get the staff in the room or in that setting to actually get the aha moment when you're not even telling them. You're just simply saying, what's the behavior? Help me describe it. What happens after? And they go, oh yeah. Now, one of the things, and I think I mentioned this last time, it was sort of, we were right in the middle of this piece of it, is the importance of doing functional assessment of appropriate behavior. If you think about it, we often look at the assessment of the environments in which kids' behavior is inappropriate or undesired. But if we also know when they're doing exactly what we've asked them to do, if we know the environments where they're being successful, we can compare and contrast those and start saying, what do they have here that they don't have here? And look at it that way. And sometimes that also can help teachers say, oh, I could do a little bit more of this. But I go back to saying there is no quick and easy answer for people feeling threatened by the process, except to be as gentle as possible, to be as respectful as possible, and on the other end, acknowledging this may or may not work.
I haven't even gotten through the interview yet. This is just interviewing.
Right,
and
right.
Asking the questions, it's like, oh my gosh, you are questioning
Right.
what they're doing. And they take it to heart. I mean, they're not against you or anything, but they just really take it to heart that they're doing something.
Yeah, and you know that's not personal, right? Right. It's just, I mean, I think that's part of the system we've set up. As a matter of fact, a lot of teacher training programs, pre-service teachers are not getting the kind of coaching that prepares them to get that kind of feedback and coaching when they're in service. So, yeah. Yes.
What's supposed to be first, the data or the interview? Or does it matter?
The interview is part of your data collection. Now, there may be pieces that you can do before that. When a student is referred to you, you may want to take a quick look at their records, see where they're at academically, just sort of get an eyeball view of where it is. I'm going to do the facts pretty quickly, and the reason that I'm going to do the facts pretty soon, pretty early in the process, is because if I have a pretty strong idea, like these folks did, if I have a pretty strong idea about what the behavior is, what the function is, and what some solutions might be, and I go to that teacher, and the teacher says, I agree, that's what I'm concerned about, yes, I think that's why they're doing it, help me out, I very quickly short-circuit it. I don't want to collect more data than is necessary to solve the problem. So I think one of the things that we want to be cautious about is doing a full-blown assessment if a mini FBA, just the quick, what's the behavior, what's the function, where can we go from here, if that will do.
I mean, the teacher kind of threw me for a loop because I went in there and I said, I'd like you to, see what happens in the classroom, so just, if you could checklist for me. She goes, I don't want to collect data, I want help right now. Forget about collecting data, give me some help right now.
Yeah.
I was like,
Again, it partly goes back to how much do you know about the behavior, but remember too that we can also use functional assessment with adults. And so the question, and I don't mean that, I'm not saying that to be disrespectful, please understand, that's not meant to be disrespectful, but the question is her behavior intended to obtain something or escape something? I don't know, I don't know her. But I think it's important to understand that. For example, she definitely wants help. That's what she's communicating, is remember that just because a student communicates something doesn't necessarily mean that's the function. So if the student says, I want out of the class, I want to leave, I want to get away from this, doesn't mean that I'm going to always listen to that soundtrack and believe it. It's one piece of information. So students may do something and say, I'm here doing this to get out of class, when in fact, what you see is they've got a full audience there, and they're playing to that audience, and they're enjoying it, and once they get out of the classroom, the behavior and the person almost shrink back down to normal size. So my question would be, does she want help, or is she hoping that she can get rid of this student and get rid of you? And I don't mean that to be disrespectful, because sometimes that one more kid with high needs in the class is the straw, as they see it, that breaks the back. In those cases, one of the first things that I'm going to do, and it may be something here that we want to go back to, is ensuring that we have a plan for the adults in the room. Because the plan for the student is irrelevant if the adults in the room are not supported in a way that they can be successful. So what does this teacher do when he or she is done? Finished, I can't take anymore, I'm going to whack somebody. And then we have to have a plan. Some teachers don't need that. They're calm, cool, and collected. Some teachers are a little more high-strung, or they're a little more stressed out, or they're experiencing more stressors in their life. And we need to ensure that we're having those discussions with them to say, yeah, boy, I hear you, and let me commiserate with you for a few minutes, but we also need to make sure that we don't get caught up in the idea that it's a gripe session, and we're admiring the problem, and we're talking about how difficult the student is, but we're not moving us any closer towards helping that student be successful. And that's a hard balance. Hard balance. Good question.
I was just wondering, could it be that the teacher's trying to avoid being blamed
Mm-hmm.
for the responsibility and the data might reflect that?
Yeah, there's a lot of different kinds of aversives that we can experience, and my guess is most teachers experience consultants and coaches as an aversive. I mean, that's a hard one to avoid, and so, that's, I think, something has also been mentioned here. Yep.
We had a situation last year, and it was much the same with everyone sharing, that it was a table full of skeptics. And it was only when, and sometimes the process was forced on us, and we just had to do it. It was only when we saw a change in behavior for the better that you started to get some believers. And
Right.
more people were kind of on board with that. And then the process, I think, accelerated from that. Do you agree? So I think sometimes you just got to plot ahead. Okay, I understand, I hear you, but this is what we have to do.
Right. And you'll remember that when we were talking in here, I don't know if it was day 1 or day 2, one of the things I suggested, even though the case that might call to you because of your frustration level is your toughest student, the student who is creating the most stressors for the staff, that's not always a good place to start. Start with a case that you can be successful on. Start with maybe a case that's a little easier. Show that your team and your process is successful, and move to a harder case and harder case. I think that this is important because it's good PR with your staff.
Now, ours was the hardest case.
Yeah.
But
And
something had to happen.
absolutely. And sometimes you have to carve out pieces, small pieces of a hard case to make that work.
We did. I mean, we dealt with the escaping behavior.
Right.
And what we found is that a lot of things improved when we were able to get him to attend better
Okay. Good.
or escape appropriately.
Good. All right. Let me talk a little bit about what I had planned, and then let's dive in. So I just want to make sure we have a quick review here. So there's the historical, ethical, and legal perspectives and background and programmatic issues, infrastructure and superstructure. These are some of the things that we covered in the first 2 days. We ended in talking about some of the functional behavior assessment, the assessment tools. Is that correct? Remember some of the assessment data collection pieces. We're going to do a little piece on that, and then we're going to move into this functional support planning, implementation issues, and evaluating success. At the end of the day, we will give you a post-test. Remember the pre-test that we started on day 1? We'll give you a post-test and let you go through and see. We want you to see what you've gained, what you've grown, knowledge and skills, confidence level. All right. So quick review. There's some critical ideas that are at the base of this, and we may need to keep going back with our staff to this. Behavior is lawful. It is not completely random. It actually follows certain laws. We know that. It's contextual. Behavior is based on the context or environment in which you experience it. You change the environment, you change the behavior. Data is critical. One of the things that we know very clearly, both in academics and in behavior, is if you're not collecting data, you have no idea what's happening. You believe you know what's happening, but if we don't use this piece with hard data, we get lost. Because on those days when that teacher is very frustrated, even if that teacher is us, good idea that your tracking of the experience is going to change what you see in terms of the behavior. And we need to focus on changeable events. Continuous improvement and collaboration make a difference. Historical interpretations, they've changed over time. And ethical, I just want to say again, if you have questions about your plan, select the more careful, cautious, or conservative route and talk with a colleague. Never make these plans alone. Particularly when you're getting into issues of safety, never make these plans alone. And document your process. Okay? There's a lot of different laws and policies. Ensure that you're following the laws of your state and the district policies. Historically, what we've tried to do is modify the child. We've punished, excluded, secluded these kids, and that has historically, been a mainstay of what we do, and it's not really worked very well. What we're looking to now is how do we modify the environment? How do we change the environment in which the behavior is occurring, changing the context? We can talk about PBS and the importance of having all of your systems in place. You have these slides. You can review them at your leisure. But I want to go back to saying how important it is. If your system doesn't have a green zone in place and a yellow zone in place, you're going to have too many cases in the red zone and you're going to get swamped. The other piece is the systems that you put in place to support individual students, the plans you put in, are based on the success of your yellow and red zone supports. If your yellow and red zone supports aren't working well, it's going to be very hard for you to have a red zone support plan that works well. If you have a student with a phenomenally well-written behavior support plan, but you put them into a chaotic environment, I want you to just understand it's probably going to fail. So when we're talking about this, these pieces are critical elements. So what we're talking about is red and yellow zone kiddos. We talked a little bit about some of the basic behavior theory around you get more of what you pay attention to. Do you remember this video? Remember the dancing brown bear, moonwalking brown bear? Right? It's very easy to miss the things when we're looking for something else. So we have to be careful about that. We talked a little bit about reinforcement and punishment. Reinforcement is anything that what? Increases likelihood or frequency of the behavior occurring. It doesn't matter what our intention is. So as you develop your plans and you say, we're going to do this for reinforcement, I just want you to think about the difference in this language. We're going to do this with the hopes that it reinforces behavior. Because until you try it, you don't know. Punishment is anything that does what? Decreases likelihood, probability, frequency of behavior. Okay? And you don't know whether something is a reinforcer or punisher until, say it louder, you try it. You don't know until you try it and look for the effects. Okay? So the basic behavior concepts again, behavior is shaped by the environment, reinforcement increases behavior, punishment decreases it. The positive and negative, positive reinforcement, positive punishment, are positive by definition, not because it's good. It's just when you give something, add something, or deliver something. And the negatives are when you remove something. So you remember the critical piece? Just a little quick test here. Is negative reinforcement the same thing as punishment? No. And how do you know that? Because it increases the behavior. Finish the rest of it. And anything that's punisher would decrease it. Good. That's a way that I sort of know if you've got it, is that piece of, this is all definitional. It doesn't matter whether we like it or don't like it, it's definitional. We talked about very briefly, and again, I get that you're not able to control this, but you do need to know that these pieces about building structure, about building systems of support are critical. Now, there are things that we have control over. For example, how many of you are familiar with this Venn diagram? How many of you have seen this Venn diagram before? Okay, well, this is good to know. Okay, so this Venn diagram, when we're talking about behavior support or functional assessment or whatever it is, the practices are what you do to support student behavior. For example, we know that by the research that you need to have 5 to 7 positives for every negative interaction with a student, correct? That's one of the practices that supports appropriate student behavior. But what supports the adults doing that? If we don't have a system in place to encourage this practice can get lost. So we may have tickets or coupons in place. We may teach teachers how to do that. We may have it in our handbook of why we do it, when we do it, how we do it. These systems ensure that we do this. So when you're thinking about functional assessment, it's important to say, what can we do to ensure that we do what the practice says, what we're supposed to do. How can we ensure that you are building your behavior support plans based on the function? One of the things is that you use certain forms. Now, I'm not saying I really care what form you use, as long as it has the component pieces to it. But by doing this, for example, if you use the FACTS, the Functional Assessment Checklist for Teachers and Students, if you use that, you will walk through this system process to get to the practice that you need, which is basing your behavior support plan on the student's function. If you don't consciously take the time and effort to determine the function and connect the function to the support plan, what's the chances that your support plan will work? Do you remember this? 50-50. The research indicates that if your behavior support plan is not based on function, the chances that you will decrease problem behavior are exactly the same as you will make it worse. I think this is a critical piece for us to go back and say, did we get the function right? Now, data is the piece that supports good decision making. So we need to include in our systems good data collection to give us the information we need. Okay? You can go down through what are some of the support issues in the system building. We talked a little bit about the importance of changing systems, understanding systems and systems thinking. Do you remember some of those pieces? Connecting to the values and the needs of the people that you're working with. So when we talk about a teacher you're trying to get to move into a thinking functionally, you might say, what's their need? What's their interest here? What are they looking for? And in doing that, I want you to think of your role as coach. You're really more a coach than a consultant, because you are gaining information, knowledge, and skills, but now what you're doing is putting into play as a coach. So we talked about thinking functionally about behavior, tried to increase some of your comfort with the knowledge and skills, developing a presentation, and delivering that to a colleague or a group of colleagues. And you become a coach in that regard. So in presenting a case, we talked about the importance of keeping it really brief so that we can get down to the nitty-gritty very quickly and exclude a lot of information that may not be specifically as directly related to solving the behavior support plan issue. Okay. So we said you would bring 2 case studies, you would develop a piece on thinking functionally, and you would bring that, and you did that back in November. And in November we got into the thinking functionally, or functional behavioral assessment. So how many of you can tell me what it means to think functionally? What does it mean to think functionally? If you can tell me what it means to think functionally, raise your hand. That's all right, be cocky, you can do it. I see a few people doing this. Oh, come on. How many of you were involved in developing your presentation about thinking functionally about behavior? Raise your hand, raise them up there, come on. Okay. How many of you talked to somebody else about thinking functionally and what that means? Okay, here's what I'd like you to do. I'd like you to turn to somebody next to you. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. How many of you could explain to somebody what thinking functionally is? Raise your hands. I'm not saying that you're like going to go on the lecture circuit, but you could explain it to somebody. Okay? What are some of the critical elements of thinking functionally about behavior? You need to know why they're doing it. In specific, use the functional assessment language. You want to know the antecedents, what they're doing, and the environment in which they do it. Okay. What keeps it going. Okay. Excellent. So if you know the conditions or the antecedents under which it occurs, you can predict the behavior. You have to have a good description of the behavior, and you have to know what keeps the behavior going, what maintains it, or the function that it serves. How many of you could say that to somebody that you know? Antecedent behavior and consequences. Antecedents are predictors. Consequences maintain the behavior. So we have an operational definition of the behavior. That's the B. Antecedents and consequences, the A. Antecedents comes before, consequences what follows after. And from that, you're going to develop a hypothesis statement or a best guess as to the function of the behavior. Okay? Clear operational definition. If you don't have a clear operational definition, stop now. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200. Because if you don't have a clear definition, first of all, we don't know what we're looking for. It's impossible to collect data. Secondly, it may be that you have multiple behaviors serving different functions. So make sure you have the looks like, sounds like. Okay, so let me see. Johnny's being aggressive in class. Who can turn that into an operational definition? Johnny's being aggressive in class. Turn that into a measurable, observable operational definition.
You have to tell me exactly what he's doing to be aggressive.
Excellent. He's stomping his feet. He's hitting the kid next to him. He's spitting. In which case, I'd even want to go as far as say, is he spitting on things or spitting on people? Is he spitting on peers or spitting on the teacher? Excellent. Good. We've just turned it from a vague concept into a specific operational definition. If you go into a classroom and you try to measure aggression, can you do that without operationally defining it? No. When I say spitting on the teacher, I'm pretty clear I can observe that. It either happens or it doesn't. Without this, we're not moving on. The antecedents, what occurs before. We can talk about setting events. This sets up the behavior, occurs a long ways back in time, potentially. And the set off, the immediate antecedent. This helps us know when it's going to occur. This helps us predict the behavior. And consequences are just what happens after. If I say he spits on the teacher, I see it, and then I look to see what happens afterwards, and the teacher says, I've had it with you, you're out of here, go to the principal's office, or says, we really need to talk about this, or turns and ignores it. Each of those is a consequent that may be maintaining the behavior. Okay, so antecedents, behavior, and consequences. So this is our flow chart. And what we're looking for is to fill in the hypothesis statement. When blank has happened, setting event, and then the antecedent occurs, the child, the student, the person will, this is the behavior, resulting in, that's the consequence, or followed by. When Dale hasn't had enough sleep, and then Sherry asks him to speak to lots of people, Dale will make silly jokes, resulting in Sherry sending him to the principal's office or Lucille Eber's office, for those of you who know Lucille. Okay. Is this a legit hypothesis statement? Could you tell if that behavior occurs? What's the behavior in there, by the way? Making silly jokes, okay. What's the antecedent, the immediate antecedent? Sherry asked him to speak to lots of people. What's the setting event? Not getting enough sleep. And what is the consequence? Sent to the principal's office. Okay. What we're looking to do with our behavior support plans today is help them find a better way to meet that need. And then we're going to move up into what's the ideal behavior that we'd like ultimately. Okay. So in assessment, we go back to assessment as the process of collecting relevant information to help us answer a question or solve a problem. So assessment can be interviews. It can be looking at records. There's a lot of different things that it can be. But it needs to be relevant information that's important. Whoops. There we go. So there's a list of some things that are some sources of information. And then we get into functional behavior assessment. What is different between traditional assessment and functional behavior assessment is whether or not we're trying to fix what two things. Traditional assessment, we were trying to fix the kid. And in functional assessment, we're trying to fix or change the environment. These are a couple of resources, books that are probably the two easiest and best. Yes?
Both available in the ISRC library.
Excellent. Brought to you by. Excellent. All right. By the way, that's one of those good resource things that you need to know, but Sherry also is a lot more broad-minded than that. She's got free tattoos for you guys. But only if you've earned it.
You were the first one here.
No, no. It is contingent on behavior. You'll just have to hang on that one, won't you? We'll find out. Okay, so these resources are available to you. What is functional assessment? A process for identifying the events that reliably predict and maintain the target behavior. Four-term contingency, setting events, antecedent, behavior, and consequence. These are the four assumptions under this. Behavior is lawful, it serves a function, it serves a communicative purpose, and it's contextual. The F in FBA. Problem behaviors generally generate functional outcomes. That is, they work. What are the two functions? Obtain and avoid. There is research on this. These are the only two things that show up in the literature as being supported by the research, is obtaining or avoiding. And typically, the things are what? Give me some examples of what they might be obtaining, for example. Attention, and we can separate that into peers and adults. What else? Sensory input. A tangible, could be activity, could be a person. What might they be trying to avoid? Work. People. Attention. There could be, yep. Yeah, absolutely. That's getting harder because that's a hard one to measure. Now, embarrassment. It is interesting because I understand that's very possible, but the further we start getting into some of those things, it starts getting, because one of the places that people will often go is revenge. And when they tried to find that stuff in the literature, when they tried to find it in research, they couldn't come up with that reliably, those kinds of issues, where they start getting into larger, broader kinds of concepts. So, all right. How does it differ in practice? In practice, a functional assessment, you're getting really specific with your questions. What's the behavior look like? What's the behavior sound like? What happens immediately before? What happens immediately after? These responses help you develop your hypothesis statement, and they're related to alterable features of the environment. Okay. I want us to be really clear on this one because you might see this one come back to you. If you're doing an FBA, what are the outcomes? What are the 5 outcomes to doing a functional assessment? You need, number 1, an operational description of the behavior. Number 2, the identifying of the events that reliably predict. What's that called? The antecedents. Setting events is a special type of antecedent, setting events and antecedents. Okay? Identifying of the maintaining consequences, a hypothesis statement, and the 5th one that we really just sort of started talking about at the end of last time is you may want to do direct observational data collection in order to confirm or disconfirm your hypothesis, or support or not support your hypothesis. Okay? Those are the 5 outcomes of an FBA. Who should conduct an FBA? A team. An FBA should never be done alone. And the research by Leah Benazzi has shown that there are 3 critical roles on the team. You need someone who is an expert in FBA and the behavior support development process. You need someone who's an expert in the child. And you need someone who can free up the resources or deliver the resources necessary to help the plan put the plan into play. If you don't have these 3 groups or these 3 areas of expertise, your plan is likely to fail. This is very clear. You can develop a marvelous plan as an FBA expert and have it not implemented. You can develop a plan that everybody likes, but is not technically adequate to create the change you want. You can develop a plan and everybody like it and still not have the resources to make it happen. 3 players. Now, I'll be really clear. You're the expert on kids with hearing impairments, correct? I can't serve this purpose on your team. If I were to walk into your team right now, I couldn't serve this purpose, could I? I don't know the kids. I don't know the setting. I don't know those things. But I might be able to do this for you. So when you walk in to your building to join your team to do the functional assessment and to develop the behavior support plan, I want you to ask yourself, which of these 3 roles am I playing? And are all 3 of these roles represented in the people who are in the room? Without those 3 roles, there's a good chance the plan won't get put into play or won't be successful. Okay? Questions or thoughts about that?
Is it a problem if we're 2 of those?
Which 2?
Well, say we're the person on our team, obviously, because we're here, but then we would also maybe be the teacher or the
Oh.
management of the student who's involved.
Okay, I misunderstood.
Like Colin Raven or Sherry or...
Could a person do 2 of them? You can. It is really nice when the student expert also has more FBA skills. But it also depends a little bit on the severity of the case. If we're talking about a mini FBA, one that's a little more simple, then having some combined people is not necessarily a problem. One of the things, as cases become more and more difficult, challenging, confusing, intractable behavior, etc., I really want people to have separate roles, partly because if you're inside the situation, it's sometimes hard to separate yourself out to be the FBA expert because you're way inside the context. It's sort of like I was an EMT, emergency medical tech, when my daughter fell and broke her arm in front of me. And it was a really ugly break. And I was useless in an emergency medical situation. Thankfully, my uncle was there, who was also an EMT. But suddenly, my technical level of expertise, because I was the student or child expert in that case, was irrelevant. It was very hard for me to think clearly about what I needed to do. I needed an outsider. So in this case, when you have the more difficult cases, having those roles separated is important. Yes, 2 people could overlap in 2 areas. Okay, other thoughts, questions?
Do you have a maximum of people at those meetings, in your opinion, that works or doesn't work?
No. I would never say there's a maximum. Part of that is, anytime, if you've got a group of people who really want to be there, shutting somebody out may be shutting out the possibility of success. On the other hand, it's just like any group, the larger the group grows, the slower it moves. You may need to have a large group and move slowly, depending on the situation, the social context of it. So you may need to have the whole family there and the kiddo there, and you may need to have 3 teachers there or 5 teachers there, and that's going to make things move very slowly. By the way, this would really probably more be on the behavior support planning side than the assessment and data collection side. In the assessment and data collection side, I can do those pieces at a time, right? So I need these 3 people to be there to set up the plan for assessment, but then I'm going to go out, or somebody's going to go out and collect data from multiple people. So multiple people will be involved in collecting data from them. But when it comes to behavior support planning, that's when the group may grow. Because now you need social validity, that piece of, yeah, this is acceptable, this meets my thinking, my values around the behavior and how to change it. Good question. Anything else? Okay. All right. If you have an effective environment, you will make problem behaviors irrelevant, inefficient, and ineffective. We're going to come back to this piece over and over in the process of behavior support planning because this is your goal. Problem behaviors are irrelevant. If a student is acting out because they cannot do the academic work, you can make that behavior irrelevant by giving them work that they can do, or giving them the support to allow them to do the work. If students are acting out because they're being bullied and harassed during recess, we need to go back to the issue of removing the bullying and harassment. Oftentimes what we've done is focused entirely on the consequences of the behavior. If you focus there, that is not the most respectful of the students, because that means they have to fail before we intervene. Inefficient. It is a lot easier in most classrooms, in most schools, for students to get adult attention by misbehaving than by behaving appropriately. If it is more efficient to do what you want, to get what you want by doing inappropriate behavior, we will do that. That is one of those places where behavior is lawful. And ineffective. If a student is trying to get, say, peer attention through inappropriate behavior, and we ensure that they don't get it, we have just made that problem behavior ineffective. We'll keep coming back to this piece over and over, because this is at the heart of behavior support planning. So I mentioned just a minute ago the FBA Continuum. On this side over here is anybody who can think functionally about behavior. This is the instructional assistant on the playground who says, why do I think they're doing that? Oh, you know, I think they're doing that to obtain this or to avoid that. And they start thinking in those terms to create an informal intervention. A mini FBA is the most basic FBA, where we actually have a discussion, a formal discussion around, here's the behavior, let's talk about what it looks like, what happens after it, what happens before it, what do we think, and we create a small, easily written out hypothesis statement and develop a plan based on that. If we're not absolutely certain that our hypothesis or summary statement is correct or adequate, we move up to the FBA plus observation. And as things get more complex, more difficult, more challenging, we may move into a full functional assessment or functional analysis. Your expertise ranges in this room from thinking functionally to people who may be at that level of full functional analysis. And I'm not going to tell you that full functional analysis is where I'm at my best, because in most of these situations we are talking about clinical settings where they are surrounded by a team throughout this entire process with lots of support. This is like the Kennedy Krieger Institute, or I don't know what do you have a state residential neurological testing facility in Illinois? Where if kids are really dramatically impacted, life-threatening behaviors, they can go there for assessment, plan development. Yeah. Yeah. So these folks are up here. Let's say you have a kiddo who's headbanging, who's self-injurious at the level that it's life-threatening. This is where they will actually, if they're not clear on the function, they can actually set up conditions to elicit the behavior and stop the behavior, elicit the behavior and stop the behavior. That would be considered probably, it's very dangerous for anybody to do in a school setting, and probably would be considered unethical. So you're not going to be into that place of saying, we want to just test our hypothesis. Let's see if we can set him off and get him to bust somebody in the chops, right? You're not going to be going there. You, on the other hand, are going to probably do this piece of it. And so many of you are at the level that you can walk through the FBA and do observations. Most of you now are very capable of doing a mini functional behavior assessment with the facts. I want you to just be clear on where you're at in your comfort level and that you're moving up. Many of you, when you came here, had never even heard about thinking functionally. Now you can do that. Now you've practiced administering the facts. So your skill level is increasing, but be clear on what your skill level is and what it is not. Because if you get into behavior that's above your head and you go, I'm not really sure I'm clear on this, make sure you go back to the team piece, back to this team piece and say, I need a higher level of expertise, somebody with a higher level of expertise to run this assessment at the next level. Are you clear on that? Okay. And Sherry, do they call you if they say, I'm probably pretty good at a mini FBA, but when I start getting up into here, I'm not so sure. Who do they contact if they need more expertise?
Each of these teams is assigned to an ISRC team member, and they pass out
Good.
We'll share that information again.
If you don't know who your ISRC person is, make sure you talk to Sherry and get you linked up, because you need to know what your skill level is and what it isn't so that you can contact somebody who has a higher level. Okay. All right, I think what we're going to do is take a quick break right now, get everybody up and moving, and we're going to dive into some of the assessment pieces. So let's go ahead and take a break. Let's take 10 minutes.